Are you tired of always using the same blocks over and over again on your builds? Well, today we are going to be exploring in depth a method for choosing different and unique color palettes to paint your builds in Minecraft. The method has some easy to follow steps that are incredibly useful both for practicing and improving your painting skills, while also it can get you inspired when not knowing which blocks to use. So without further ado, let's jump into it. The first step is the palette selection. For that, what we are going to do is to go into this site called Color Hunt. This site is absolutely amazing because you can find a bunch of different color palettes that can inspire you to build something that you would normally not build. I would say there are some palettes that resemble Minecraft blocks in a better way than others. For instance, this one is a very beautiful one. We could go from netherrack to mangrove all the way to terracotta and sandstone. This would be a palette that works really well. But I don't wanna do that, I wanna choose something more difficult. I think this one will be very fun. You know what? No, I think I like this one way better. So let's click on this one. So here we have the palette that we chose, and the cool thing about this site is that you can see it has the codes of each one of the colors. For instance, we have the code for the yellow, both in hex values and in RGB, and this is going to be super useful, and let me show you why. So now in Minecraft we can write down those RGB values. For instance, for the yellow it was 255, 178 and 0. For the orange it was 235, 910. So now that we have the RGB values of each one of the colors from our palette, what we can do is, using Axiom, one of the latest versions, we have this thing called the color picker. And as you can see here, we can type in the RGB values of the color that we want, and also the HSV if we want, or the hex one. So for instance, taking this one into consideration, we can open the menu and write down 255, 178, 0. And this is going to be the color from our palette. And here to the left, this is going to tell us which one is the closest to it. In our case, the yellow concrete seems to be very close to it, so let's grab that one and place it here. Now we do the same for all of the other colors. For the orange, 235, 91, 0, and the closest is also the concrete. That is very interesting. Let's go for the red one. The closest to the red is this mushroom one, and for the purple one is the crimson. So this will be our palette. So the problem that we find when doing this is that these colors, we don't have variants of blocks. The only one that has variants is the crimson one, where we can use stairs, slabs and fences and trapdoors. So this one is actually a good block to use, but for the other ones we have nothing. So what we are going to be doing before actually using this palette is we are going to use another tool from Axiom, which is the one below, called Gradient Helper, and we are going to place both extremes between two colors, like from the yellow to the orange, to see and get a quick idea of which blocks go into the gradient. So as you can see, we have the resin, the orange wool, the concrete powder, the honeycomb, and the block of raw gold. Once we have that, we can bring this in and use the blocks that we want from here. We don't need to use all of this, but we can start smoothing out the gradient and seeing which blocks we might find useful here. For instance, between these two, I will change the resin to this other resin, because this one we get walls, slabs and stairs, which is what we are looking for. We are looking for these variants of blocks. So once we have the gradient from one to the other, we can do the same from orange now to red and see what happens. We go to the gradient helper, we place these two things here, and we see which blocks we get. If you want to see other options, you can always click here to see what other blocks would work there. For instance, here I do really like the use of red concrete powder there. Here maybe do we have anything else? Strip wood wouldn't be bad, I don't think. So now we can see that to go from concrete to there, we need to go back to resin and jump to red don't be afraid of ignoring some of these blocks and changing it up. I don't want to use this one, I want to use this one instead. I think that works better here on the gradient. With practice on these things, you're gonna find your own criteria on when to use one of the blocks, on when not to use it, on when to change it. And now we need to do the same for the last bit of the gradient between red mushroom block and crimson. And let's see where we need to go with this. Again, I don't wanna go to the glazed, and then here we can probably do like that. Here, for instance, I don't like the way this looks. I think that's gonna feel better like that. Just to make our life easier, we can go there. I think in this case there is a terracotta, the purple one, that could work nicely here on the transition between these two. Yeah, that's how we can work a palette that we can use on our build with some really easy steps. For the shape of the build, I decided to go with a simple octagonal tower, using diamonds as our main placeholder block and gold as accents, while also implementing prismarine stairs and walls to add small details in specific areas. For this particular tower, I'm following a reference picture, the one you can see on screen, which is something I always recommend doing if you need inspiration, but we'll talk more about that later on. Now, the focus of this video is not about shaping, so I don't want to spend forever talking about this, but I feel there are a few things that are worth mentioning. This is clearly a large structure. It's very tempting when we build large to have a bunch of mega windows and doors everywhere, like we have here underneath, but if we do that, the scale of the build is going to be reduced. Just to show you what I mean, let me quickly copy this arch and bring it to the top. Imagine you are like, oh, I have all this empty wall and I just want to make a big window there. You can see how the build immediately looks smaller, but what we can do to make sure that the scale is working is include more stuff like this. Basically add smaller details. Pop some smaller windows in places like this. The way that I like to think of this is a contrast in sizes. And those windows are actually pretty large, we can go smaller even. Look how larger it looks with those smaller windows there. So now it's fully detailed. As you can see, we have a bunch of windows, a bunch of broken elements, and we are using a bunch of the things that we were talking about: small windows, small cracks and broken things, some small texturing resembling broken brick parts, bigger windows, more cracks, and as we said before, it is really selling the idea of this build being a very large scale one, when maybe it's not that much. If I didn't show you before, for this build I've been using this reference to get inspired by it. It's not 100% accurate, and I chose this particular reference mainly for one reason, not only because I really like the shape of the tower itself, but also because it's a grayscale drawing, and I think that's gonna be really helpful for what we want to do. You can see here very clearly how the build is highlighted and shadowed. We have full white on these two faces of the tower, and then we have a gray on the other side, and here on the smaller details we can also see a bunch of that going on. Of course, we need to use this more complex palette, our build won't be grayscaled, but we can very easily use that as a guide to know where we need to place the brightest colors, which are going to be these ones, going from yellow to orange, and where we want to place the shadows, where we can go all to here to the crimson and the reds. To begin with, let's do the following. Let's set up a tool mask of block equal diamond, and what I want to do is I want to grab the white color and I want to paint this face of diamonds very carefully. I'm gonna set up a cuboid shape for the brush. Just gonna go around and paint the faces of the structure that I see highlighted in white. Not only these faces of the structure are painted with white, we also have the front faces over here. So now I'm going to change to another color of wool, to a gray one, and we are going to paint the other faces over here with that. And then we can go to a darker gray on the back to complement that. And the lapis blocks, which are like naturally indented parts of the tower, we can paint it with black wool to make sure that those are going to be very shadowed. So you can see now how this resembles way better the reference that we have. There are some areas like here where this would really need to be shadowed. If you are learning to do shading, I definitely recommend you start with something basic like this, where you use placeholder blocks like these different tones of gray wools, prior to trying to do the shading and the lighting with a more complex palette like this one. Now we need to actually paint this. First thing to notice, I am ignoring all the small blocks because these are part of the details and we are going to see ways of painting those later on. For now we are just focusing on the main blocks of the build. If we remember, the original palette was yellow, orange, red mushroom block and crimson. Basically what we are going to be doing is assigning one of each of the wool colors to one of these segments. Mostly I would say the white is going to go all the way to there. These are like the brightest colors that we got. The gray probably is going to go all the way to the reds. Even the grays would go all the way to here, and we will see what to do with the blacks. But for now this is going to be roughly the association of colors that we're gonna be doing. We can do something very simple and we can choose the yellow concrete powder, drag and drop it on the white to quickly do the change of color and see how this would work. Then of course the gray would need to be orange. So now we got the simple shading that we had with white, gray and black. You can see that it still looks very simplistic. It doesn't look bad. Now we are going to target the yellow ones, the yellow concrete, and I'm going to be using the painter tool in gradient mode. Choose interpolation linear, and here I'm gonna choose all the colors from the palette all the way to resin. And we're gonna come here and do a quick painting just like that. That gave it a lot more texture. Very nice. Of course you can always undo and try again a few more times if you want. So then we do the same, but this time we are going to target the orange concrete powder, and the gradient is going to go starting on the last block of the previous one. We are going to go all the way to the red concrete powder and paint these faces with those blocks. Something like this. I think that works nicely. And the last one, we just need to target the crimson wood now. So just like that, we have applied the color palette to our build, and I think the result is very cool. We now need to paint the actual walls and stairs with colors that make sense. So we have acacia, red, that's basically what we have, acacia and red. So we need to find walls that have a similar color than that. The closest that we can find to that are going to be these walls. That's something that happens because of the palette that we chose, but I think that we can work with that. If we do like this and like that, we can get something decent going there. We can do it by hand, but another way of doing that, we can set a tool mask, and here on the tool mask we can go to tags and find prismarine. So this is going to target all the different blocks of prismarine, slabs, stairs, walls and all that. So what I need to do now is I need to select a block, for instance bricks, that have wall types similar to the color that I want. And then here on the painting tool I can choose type replace. So now when I paint, it's going to automatically change all the prismarine, whether they are slabs, stairs or walls, to the block that we have chosen. And you can see how slowly you can paint all the shaping that you made. Just basically follow the colors of the blocks that you have next to you, and that tends to be a good result. And because of the design that we chose here for these arches, we have trapdoors here, and we probably need to select some type of block that has trapdoors in them, like dark oak, and paint with those here. And what I want to try, since we have all the black wool over here, and we can try to paint this with something crazy. That looks neat, but it's a bit too bright in my opinion. We can always respect the palette and go for the crimson planks. Yeah, let's stick with the palette. I've tried a few things, purple works really nice, but I think just staying with crimson is gonna be the one. Alright, so I will say that with that, the build is finished and it's looking quite amazing. I'm really happy with this. I also went ahead and did some other paintings with other palettes, just following the same kinda idea. I will put the palettes that I chose and that I used to make this in the screen so you can see them and use them if you like them. But you can see the results are very different, but following kinda the same steps, you can make different palettes work. There might be some that work better than others, but that's part of the fun of this. Then over here we have another one that is very similar, kinda yellowy. This one is an interesting one because I really like the palette, but I don't like how I applied it here. I don't think it worked for this kinda shading. Then over here we have one that I think has the best result because of the contrast of the highlight and the shadow. This one I didn't do it super complicated because it's darker, so it's basically some yellows as the highlights, some reds and very dark purples as the shadows. And finally I also applied the same palette that we used at the beginning, the one with the yellow concrete, the orange and the red, but in this case I applied it with a simple gradient going from the top to the bottom, and you can see that this still works really well. I think the result here is also very cool. I really like it. If you want to learn more about the different painting styles that you can apply to any build, I recommend you watch this video where I go through all of them in detail. And here we have another one. What is that one? Oh, and the last one that I tried was the same kinda gradient, but with a more simple or more classic palette that goes all the way from grey to sandstone. And I think it works very nice. I really like this. This is the one that I took more time into the painting and I'm in love with this. I really like this. So I'm staying with this one as my favorite one. You let me know if you have one that is better for you. I made some really quick terrain using Axiom and you can see how now the build looks way more complete just sitting on top of this kinda sloped terrain. But yeah, that's how you could apply a very fancy palette like this one on a build to make something interesting and learn a bit more about color and how to do some shading on your builds. There are some mistakes here. And that's going to be everything. I'm going to be including in the description of this video and on my Patreon a free download to this map with all the builds that we made, so that you can maybe take a look up close, take a look at the palettes and the shading, and also I will be including a copy with diamond blocks so that if you want you can follow along this video and try to copy the tutorial or practice the shading yourself with the same build, which I believe is a really nice exercise to practice the color palettes and the shading. But that's going to be everything for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something new today. This has been Calvin and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.